I'm Lindsay Sturkey, and welcome to Simple Spiritual Practices. This episode is part of the Summer Replay series featuring some of my favorite episodes and foundational practices. In each episode of this podcast, we'll talk about one tangible practice that will help you know yourself and God better. Most of these practices can be done in 5 minutes or less, so you can easily try it out today. If you are ready to experience real growth in your life, or if you want fresh ideas on how to approach your time with God, this podcast is for you. Something I've been noticing lately is how long I can go through my day and not think about God at all. And I would tell you that my relationship with God is the most important thing in my life, yet my mind is constantly pointed towards other things. So have you ever stopped to think, how much is God actually on my mind? So at this point in my life, I've been pretty consistent in keeping a habit of spending time with God first thing in the morning. I get up before my kids, I have my coffee, and I go through just kind of my morning quiet time routine, which usually involves time in prayer, reading the Bible, and often journaling. Now, I, of course, miss a morning here or there, and some mornings I end up kind of rushing through it, or I might struggle to engage with it. But for the most part, this is one habit and routine that I've kept up with pretty well. And most days I at least make some kind of effort, even if it's just for a few minutes. But to be totally honest, sometimes that time just becomes something that I kind of just check off my list. I know I need to spend time with God, so I make it a habit, but then it's like I view it as done. While setting aside intentional time to be with God is a good thing, of course, our time with Him should never be seen as done. God doesn't want to be confined to just one part of our day. He wants to spend the whole thing with us. And of course, He is with us always during our entire day, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. But for me, it's been a matter of, am I actually paying attention to that? Am I noticing that God is with me during all of my day? Or is it just when I'm paying attention during that intentional quiet time? So I think of the verse in 1 Thessalonians 5:17 that says, "Pray continually." So what does it mean to remain in a state of prayer all the time, to pray continually? Now, as you probably know, this verse isn't saying to sit with your head bowed and eyes closed all the time, because that's not what prayer is anyway. That's just one form of it. And there's a lot that we could talk about when it comes to the purpose of prayer. We could talk about how to pray, what to pray about, what it means to both speak and listen during your time of prayer. But in this episode, I really want to focus on this idea of what it means to pray continually, to not just limit our time with God to one set block of time each day. So as I thought about this idea of praying all the time, I kind of struggled a little bit with how to talk about it in this episode. Because while I would say that I am growing in this, I'm not awesome at it. I can get through an entire morning or even get to the end of a day and it'll just hit me that I haven't really given God or prayer a second thought since the morning. Now, I've heard other people that describe that they almost have this natural instinct to pray whenever they are struggling or stressed. It seems like it's just second nature to them, and I admire that so much, and it's something that I believe in, but I wouldn't say that I just naturally do that. It's not my first instinct to pray or ask God for help when I'm feeling overwhelmed or having a hard time. I wish it was, but it's just not natural to me. And I think I'm sharing that with you because it's really important for me that you know that a big reason that I'm even doing a podcast about spiritual practices is not because I have them down and I'm doing it perfectly, but it's because I desperately need to grow in them. Because I've seen just how powerful they can be in my own life when I'm intentional about it. And I really want to incorporate them into my daily life more and more. See, I need to grow in these practices of creating space for God. So in a way, doing this podcast is a commitment to learning more about them and incorporating them into my life so that I can then invite you to learn and grow right alongside me, that we're learning this and doing this together as we grow in these practices. So I don't know about you, but I need a practice that's going to help me remember to remember God during all of my day, not just one part of it. So as I talked about last week, my mind can be a pretty noisy place, and maybe yours is too. It's constantly filled with random thoughts, undone tasks, or things that I'm anxious about. Now, it's not always a negative train of thought. I'll also think about my kids or work or things I want to do. So in all of that, what would it look like to simply recognize that God is with me in those thoughts, to invite Him into that inner dialogue? Instead of my mind running on an isolated loop, how can I recognize God's presence with me in it? So like I said before, this idea of praying continually is a good thing to do. But I don't just do it naturally. It's not my second instinct at all, or not my first instinct. And I'm guessing that you don't do that either. I'm guessing that that's not something that you just naturally go to. Some of you do, but for most of us, we have to work at it. So it's probably not helpful for me to just tell you, just do it. Invite God into your thoughts, talk to Him all day long, because this is good to do. So there you go. Now you know, go do it. Because the thing is, you're going to forget, and so will I. We get going with our days. We intend to do that, to be aware of God's presence with us through our days, but we forget. So that's why we need a tangible practice that will remind us of God's presence with us. And if we build in a practice of turning towards God multiple times in our day, hopefully over time, it will become more natural to us. But before it becomes our first instinct, we need a little help to get us started. So that is exactly where this week's practice comes in. The practice we're going to learn today can help you remember God's presence with you beyond your quiet time to those not so quiet parts of your day. The goal is to carry the stillness you experience maybe in your quiet time or when you do the practice of silence that we talked about a couple weeks ago, to carry that stillness into the rest of your day. Or maybe if you haven't developed that habit of a quiet time yet, that's okay. Maybe this could be a good place for you to just start engaging with God during your day, and not just maybe on Sunday at church or a couple times a week, but this can be a way to bring God's presence into your everyday life. So I've told you that most of the practices on this podcast only take 5 minutes. But while preparing for this practice might take you 5 minutes, the actual doing of it really only takes a few seconds. The practice we're going to talk about is called a breath prayer. Now, before you think that sounds kind of weird or out there, a breath prayer is just like it sounds. It's a short prayer that you can say in a breath. And it's meant to help us make prayer as natural as breathing in and breathing out. So to do this practice, you'll identify a short phrase or sentence that expresses what you need from God right now, and then you pray it throughout your day to remember God's presence with you. It should be short and very easy to remember. So first, we're going to talk about how to come up with your breath prayer, and then I'm going to also give you some ideas for how to actually remember to do it, because it's one thing to come up with a short prayer for your day, but just like we talked about, it's really easy to get caught up in your day and get through the whole thing without giving God another thought. So I want to share some tips for how to remember to return to this prayer throughout your day. So here are the steps for this practice. Number 1 is to spend some time reflecting in God's presence to identify what you most need from Him right now. So there's a couple questions that you can use to help you as you reflect. And as you think through these questions, you may just want to jot down a few ideas of how you'd respond. Maybe like a couple bullet points or a list, just really quick, write down some thoughts that come to mind. So here are the 2 questions. What is one thing you want to ask of God right now? Another question that might be helpful is, what is one thing you need to remember about God? So these questions are just to help you identify where in your life that you need God's presence and voice the most. So just to give you an example, maybe you've been struggling with anxiety lately, and it might just be a general sense of worry. It's just kind of that nagging anxiety that won't go away. Or maybe it's tied to one specific thing that you just keep turning over and over in your head. Your mind is just kind of caught on a loop. So maybe the one thing that you would ask of God right now is peace, or you would ask God for help in surrendering that area to Him. Maybe one thing that you need to remember about God if you're struggling with anxiety is that simply God is with you, that God is in control and you are not. So your breath prayer might be as simple as, God, give me peace, or God, I give these worries to you. Or maybe it's simply, God, I believe that you are with me. I believe that you are in control. These are all examples of what your breath prayer might be. So in this first step, I just want you to write out a quick list of just your gut reaction to those questions. We're just trying to identify how this prayer can best connect to whatever is going on in your life right now. So step 2 is looking over that list of responses, pick what most resonates with you today and turn it into a phrase or sentence that will be your breath prayer to God. So my caution here is don't overthink this. It doesn't have to be perfect and you can always change it later. Sometimes a breath prayer we come up with might be just for that day, or maybe it becomes your go-to prayer for a week or even a longer season of time. Just pick whatever is resonating most right now. And as you begin to pray it, you'll be able to tell if it's connecting or not, and you can change it up as you go. So here are just a few more examples of a breath prayer. You might pray, God, give me patience. Jesus, fix my eyes on you. Holy Spirit, give me strength. Those are just a few examples. Feel free to just use one of those to get you started or come up with your own that feels like a good fit for you right now. So that's step 2, is to actually write out a phrase or a sentence that's your breath prayer. Step 3 is to put this prayer somewhere that you'll see it throughout the day. Now, this step is so important because, again, it's really easy to have good intentions about praying this prayer only to crash in bed at the end of the day and realize I have not given God or this prayer a second thought. So here are just a couple ideas of things that you can do to remember. So pick whatever is going to work best for you. So one idea is to write your breath prayer on a Post-it note or index card and put it somewhere that you'll see it throughout the day. Maybe put it on your fridge or by your computer. Maybe you put it in your car on your steering wheel. Maybe you put it by the TV remote. A lot of options here. Just pick a place where you know that you're going to look often. And then every time you see it, then you can pray that breath prayer to God. Another option is to set it as a reminder on your phone. Literally just make the reminder the words of your breath prayer. You don't need to set a reminder that says pray your breath prayer. It can just have the actual words of the prayer, which makes it really easy because then when the reminder goes off and you pick up your phone and see it, you just read the words on the screen and pray it as it comes up. So you might set it to come up at certain points in the day, maybe once in the morning, once in the afternoon, once in the evening, or even more often if you want, whatever you feel like is going to help you. Or maybe you know that there's this one point in the day where you get stressed or anxious or whatever that is. So maybe you set it to come up during that particular time. So for me, I am going to go with the option of setting a reminder on my phone because for me, that's the way I'm most likely to see it. So as I'm practicing this with you this week, because again, as I said, I desperately need help in growing in this. So I'm going to set a reminder on my phone to go off at certain points in the day to remind me to turn my thoughts towards God. So step 4 is actually saying the prayer. Step 4 is pray your breath prayer right in the middle of your busy day. Pray it especially when you feel anxious or overwhelmed. Now, you don't have to do it out loud, of course. You just say it in your mind, but almost let your anxiety or stress or difficult parts of your day be something that kind of triggers that prayer in your mind, that you know, when I feel anxious, this is what I pray. Allow that prayer to refocus your heart and attention to God, reminding you that He is always with you. So we set a reminder to pray this at certain parts of our day, but hopefully this will allow us to start remembering it during other parts of our day as well. So this is what it means for prayer to become as natural as breathing, this breath prayer that's as natural as breathing in and breathing out, because hopefully over time, when we start to feel fear or anxiety or stress, it reminds us to turn our attention from those anxious thoughts over to God instead. We simply interrupt the thoughts with a prayer to God, asking Him for help, reminding ourselves that He is with us. So as you do this practice of a breath prayer, I hope that this helps you and me as well to grow in our ability to pray continually. That our time with God will not just be limited to one time a day, but that we will recognize God's presence with us all the time. That we will ask Him for help and for the strength that can only come from His presence as we connect with Him all throughout our day. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of Simple Spiritual Practices. If you want to download a free toolkit of 5-minute practices or find other resources to help you take next steps, visit lindsaysturkey.com/free. This podcast is part of the New Hope Podcast Network, and production is done by Darren Hansen. You can check out all the podcasts on the network by visiting newhopechurch.cc/listen. Make sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode in our summer replay series, and we'll be back with new episodes this fall.